How are you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk, right on the hat. Hey guys, great discussion. We're going to talk about being micromanaged, but not from the usual perspective. Usually when we do topics about micromanagement, we kind of do it from, hey, management, don't do this. And we kind of give the advice to management as to why they shouldn't do it and how it affects the employees. This is going to be a little bit of a spin. We're going to do it from if you are being micromanaged, what you can do, what you have to do. That's why the name of this topic or this show is Don't Allow Yourself to Be Micromanaged. It's very suiting because it actually pretty much goes right into the topic. Guys, I'm sponsored by three entities. Real quick, if you guys get a chance, please check out American Military University. It's a great school. They're very supportive of what we do in corrections, very supportive of what we do on Tier Talk. If you're looking to get that degree, seek higher education, please check out American Military University. We also have Guardian RFID, from inmate tracking and cell checks to cloud-based businesses and artificial intelligence. Guardian RFID digitally transforms jails, prisons, and juvenile detention facilities of every size. Visit guardianrfid.com for more information. Also, we do have corrections content up on the Guardian RFID YouTube channel. So if you guys do get a chance, please check out Guardian RFID's YouTube channel. And we also have Shea USA. Shea USA is the world's leading weapon, cell phone, and contraband detection system manufacturer for corrections. If you guys are looking for a metal detector, a hand wand, whatever it is, please reach out to Joe Vasquez, 440-561-7615. He's a subject matter expert. He's passionate about our industry, and he will take good care of you. Guys, they do got some good equipment there. If you get a chance, please check it out. They are very supportive of what we do on Tier Talk. And don't forget, Inmate Manipulation Decoded is now available on Amazon. Working on my next book, which will be out hopefully by the beginning of next year. But in the meantime, if you want to get Inmate Manipulation Decoded, we're 1,000 copies sold already, which is great. You can go to Amazon. Link is in the description. Enough about me. Let's bring on, where is it? Connie Alleyne. Podcast professional. By the way, Connie, after you introduce yourself, can you also mention the book you have on the market, the podcast that you're doing, your company, but also I just listened to your video today about your audio on Anchor. That's what it is, on Anchor.
Yes.
Working with toxic people. I thought it was a great 25 minutes, well worthy of my time. I enjoyed it. If you also want to tell people how they can listen to that, I listened to it on Spotify, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Awesome.
Connie, introduce yourself, please.
For sure. So, hi, everybody. Connie Alleyne. I am the founder and president of the Civilian Corrections Academy. I'm also the podcast host of The Fly Behind the Wall, which is available on iHeartRadio. It's on iTunes. Wherever you listen to podcasts, just type in The Fly Behind the Wall and you will get it. Last episode was about toxic versus non-toxic employees. Sort of how do we manage it? What are those characteristics or those traits that we do see in non-toxic folks? And just even as managers, how do we address those folks? Because it's not really fun to do, right? But so podcast. And then I have The Cage Was Her Cocoon, which is available on Amazon. It's also on Kindle. So wherever you read, feel free to tap in. And now I'm here on Tier Talk, ready to have some fun with this dialogue.
Yeah, it's going to be unique. We kind of did a little bit of a last minute switch. We were going to talk about the importance of upwards communication, how that's got to be intentional. But then I kind of surprised Connie with the shift, the audible, if you will. And then I said, let's talk about being micromanaged from the other side of things. So again, Connie, we've discussed micromanagement before from a management perspective, why you shouldn't do it and how it can affect the front line. But what about if you are being micromanaged and you are looking to break free? That's a discussion we have yet to really dive deep on. So I want to mention something. So our definition of micromanage is the opposite of our definition of empowerment. So micromanagement, obviously, we know winds up making the employees hesitant, makes them reliant. They look for reassurance. And if you're looking to build future leaders, you don't want that. You want people that are empowered. You want people to embrace responsibility, make decisions, and ultimately become future leaders. So to make sure we're on the same page, Connie, how would you define micromanagement or being micromanaged?
So from my perspective, someone who is being micromanaged is not being allowed to make decisions on their own. They're not really supported to have independent thought. They're also kind of not only given constant direction, but also given the how to get it done, which certainly shows that you're not empowered to make decisions on your own. And I feel like the person that's being micromanaged kind of always has to check in, right? Like the manager typically wants to know where you are and what you're doing at all times, and usually wants to have some sort of say-so over those activities, the where you are and the what you're doing at all times.
Yeah, and I like what you said. I mean, when you manage, obviously you're going to delegate the what, but you could empower the how.
Yeah.
You know, especially if it's connected to someone who has a strong why. Look how that, look what we just did there. The what, how, that was pretty impressive.
I like that.
Unexpected, but it just comes after doing 1,100 of these, right, Connie? It comes. So here's the thing. I mean, the first thing obviously is I don't think everyone actually recognizes when they're being micromanaged. That's a concern, because I think that if you go in having a strong work ethic, wanting to take responsibility, wanting to grow, because that's key in it all. I mean, yes, you're going to grow from the technicality side of things, but there's also a growth in decision making when you start getting more and more levels of responsibility. And I believe that people that are looking to grow in their decision making will feel the pressure of micromanagement a lot quicker than someone who's just going through the motion, getting position by position. So I think first, right off the bat, is you have to recognize it first if it's happening, right? Would you agree with that, Connie? Because I believe that some people could get conditioned to it.
I think absolutely. So for some folks who prefer to not make decisions, sometimes they don't realize that they actually can't make a decision because they're being micromanaged. And then I think for some folks who may not have had the experience of being empowered, maybe this is the only management style they know how to operate under. And so I think being aware that, you know, there is almost a consequence when you make a decision on your own, right? Like could be one of those telltale signs that you are being micromanaged. So I think there's a couple of things. There's ways that some folks may not even know they're being micromanaged. And then there's, obviously, we're going to talk about ways to kind of navigate that micromanagement. But I think also one, as we're talking, it made me think about those managers who don't realize that they're micromanaging, right? Like they think that they are showing up for their staff and they're just doing all the stuff, right? Not realizing that some people want to be able to fly on their own, right? Some people want to be left alone to work independently. And so some of those micromanagers may not realize that they're not the star of the show, but they're actually the villain. So, you know, how do we find some balance in just that part of the discussion too?
And that kind of deals with the assumption, Connie. You made a good point before where, you know, we can't always assume that the person knows that they're a micromanager. So sometimes if you do recognize that, hey, I can kind of do this on my own. You gave me the what, let me figure out the how. Then those are discussions that have to be had, you know, have to be held. You know what I mean? 100%. So again, I don't believe I have it in a book coming out. You can't run a prison by assumption. So this is the dialogue that if you know through comparison, like, okay, I'm moving up and I want responsibility and I'm used to doing things on my own. So just tell me what you need to do and I'll figure out the how. And if you have a person behind you kind of micromanaging the how, you should say something. You can't.
Would you feel comfortable saying that, what you just said?
It depends because, well, I mean, we'll get to it. I get what you're saying. So it depends on the supervisor. Like I believe that I believe in 360 leadership. I believe that you can influence up, down, all around, right? So even if the supervisor isn't the most secured, because usually micromanagement would be from someone that's insecure somehow. and they could take what you're saying as a challenge to whatever it is, their position or their authority, it still has to be said. Because you don't want to go on the assumption that they know, so I still think that it could be said. If there's consequences, again, that's going to be on the supervisor, and we'll get to that point. But having said that, if it's not said, there may be a chance that's never going to get corrected. So I would say it, especially if I find myself to be confident. I'm looking to grow. I'm looking to take responsibilities. More importantly, I want to make decisions. So again, you tell me the what, let me move what I got to do, get it done, and we're good. But if you start coming at me micromanaging the how, I think I'd be in a good position to say, hey, that's not my style. Usually I'm able to handle these things. Is there any concerns with how you think I'm going to do it? I mean, there's a way, you know what you're saying, Connie? I get what you're saying. There's a way that you can approach it that still gives respect to the person who's, micromanaging you. But with that said, I still believe the discussion has to be had. So we get away from this assumption that I know, or I think that you're micromanaging me, right? So the discussion has to be had, correct?
Absolutely. So I think, when you said competent, I was thinking confidence, right? So I think when, as an employee, if there is a level of confidence that my manager trusts my competence, there's a way that you can address that micromanagement a little more directly, right? Because there's a level of trust there in my ability to do the job, right? Because that then takes away their micromanaging me because I'm not competent, right? Whereas if my manager knows me, they know my work style, they trust me, when I have that conversation about being micromanaged, I can have that conversation just based on a work style, right? As opposed to, is there something underlying that's sort of driving or triggering that manager to micromanage you?
Yeah, and guys, the reason why it has to be said is because if you are someone that's a go-getter that wants responsibility, that you're looking to kind of move up, and a big thing about moving up, guys, it's yes, I get it. Learn the technicality of the job, I get it, but there's the intangible too, the embracing the power of the position. The confidence in your decision making. To me, that's one of the biggest things that you learn as you move up, and your area of responsibility becomes greater, but you also have the authority in areas you never had experience in. So, you're going to have to be able to figure out. And the funny thing is, when you're also micromanaged, one of the things that you're losing out on is the journey that it takes to discover the answers that build the confidence. So when you're micromanaging an employee, you're taking them out of the journey and discovery of not just the end result of a decision, but how do we get to these decisions? So again, if you have that growth mindset, very important that you go ahead and tell that person who's over your shoulder, like, yo, listen, this is my concern. And, if you don't feel I'm confident, like we mentioned, well, you got to let me know what is it I can do to get back to that decision making. Because ultimately, the end of the day is whatever it is that person wants to address, the end result is going to be stop breathing over my shoulder. I got the how. I'm going to handle the how. Correct? Yeah. Is that the end result there?
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what we want, right? We want to be able to approach that micromanager and say, hey, listen, I realize you may have a concern about this thing, whatever that is. Maybe you made a mistake on something in the past. They're not quite sure you learned from that mistake. It's okay, I think, to speak openly about it. Like, yeah, I know I messed up last time, but this is what I learned from that. And I'll certainly never do that again. So if you need me to do X, Y, or Z, it's almost like you're reinforcing that they can trust you. You're reinforcing maybe some sort of behavior that they like sort of default into when they start to engage with you, right? Like, so if it is a matter of trust or it's a matter of a mistake, right? Like, because if we don't have a culture where, the staff are allowed to learn, so like make a mistake, learn from that mistake, and then still be trusted to go out and function, competently, certainly the micromanager may seem very overbearing at that time. And so I think it's important that we say, like, whatever we think Like, because then I think that's what the assumption is again too, right? Like, so the micromanager has some assumption going on, and as the employee I have an assumption going on too, right? And the only way I'm gonna either confirm that assumption is by me speaking to it directly, right? Like, it could just be like, hey, so I know that this makes you uncomfortable, but here's what I plan on doing, right? Because now you've given that micromanager some information that's going to address the issue that they're having, right? And I think what that allows us to do as the employee, it allows me to build like confidence in myself, like, oh, okay, so it's okay for me to come and talk to this person. They do respect or acknowledge that I have developed in this area where they might have been a little scared based on a mistake that I made in the past. So I think there's levels of things that happen when that trust is reestablished, and when we start to have more transparent conversations with the person who's managing us and being able to acknowledge our stuff, right? Like, listen, I know I messed up last time, and our trust might be a little shaky. You might not think I can do the job, but here's what I plan on doing to make sure like I complete the mission, right? And I think it's that information that might make that micromanager a little more comfortable with you being able to handle things without them having to constantly use their authority or constantly give you direction on how to get things done.
Now, we're going to have to re-explore that, but not just yet, because there is a piece of this. I'm hearing what you're saying that is going to directly relate to mistakes and how we perceive our mistakes, and then how they react to our mistakes. So there's a couple of things there. If we make a mistake, how do we see it? And then their reaction to that mistake could also either move us forward or set us back. But I do want to get back to that, but I don't want to forget that, because that is important. But the two things that we noticed right off the bat is you yourself have to know that you're being micromanaged. So you have to feel, and I believe the best way to feel that, because again, you could get conditioned to the environment. So the best way to feel that is if you have a comparison or another level of experience that you can compare and contrast to. Because again, if this is hard, because if you're going into this profession not having experience, then you're going to have to go back and look at your prior work experience outside this profession to kind of take a note of the difference. Because I will tell you one thing right now, everybody in corrections needs to feel empowered. The decisions need to be pushed down. They need to be handled, to be honest with you, unless they need to be forwarded up, they need to be handled at the lowest level possible. Because again, you want to empower the front line to keep things moving. So again, for people that says, well, this is
so then does that mean that the decisions should start at the front line and then escalate up as needed? Well, because you are pushing down, so I'm just thinking.
Well, you're delegating the what, but you're pushing down the how. So you know what I mean. So you're delegating the what, and you're pushing down the how, because obviously at a higher level you're going to have things that you could see that have to be implemented, and you may have to piecemeal it out. And sometimes when you piecemeal it out, not everybody has the whole picture, but there's certain functions they have to serve. Right. So I do believe that when we have our discussions at the table, you talk about, like we mentioned before, this is what has to be done, and then you go to the table and say, how would you like it done? And then everybody gets involved. So yeah, that's a great question. I think you push down you delegate the what, you push down the how. Now, with that said, again, you're working in an environment now that, I got where I'm at. So again, you lean on your past experiences to kind of say, okay, well, this is a lot different. Like again, in corrections, you should be walking into a job that expects you to adapt and adjust, expects you to make decisions. And to be honest with you, even at the very beginning of a new position, as let's say as a rookie, as a supervisor, crossing into admin, I mean, the big thing about this all here is that you have to be on your A game when it comes to decision making. And the last thing you want is to enter this profession or enter a new position and not be on that A game, because to me, that's the most important thing. That's that initial impression, that initial impact. So when you have somebody that's micromanaging you at the very beginning, it could be detrimental because you have limited experience in that new position that you're in. So you don't want to get yourself to a point where you become used to that because you have no other experiences to draw from. So again, I think that this dialogue really makes sense for people that are new to a position or new to the profession, and they're trying to set that standard of this is what's going to be acceptable so I can go ahead and be effective at the job. Now, with that said, and then kind of getting into the thought that I wanted to get into, if we become conditioned to be micromanaged, in my mind, and that means that we're allowing it to happen, in my mind, is it's because we may not know any better. That could be one thing, right? Or we don't have the courage to speak up and say, hey, we don't like this because we don't believe we have a safe environment to do that. We don't believe that our words are concerns. Like we could trust our supervisor to not come at us, like Connie had mentioned. But with that said, the condition is a concern because you can, if you sit there and not challenge that, then you will fall victim to that. So I think the big part about this all, Connie, I think you would agree, is that if there's a chance where the environment starts to, and you feel it, starts to break you away from being empowered, you're going to have to start to step up before you become conditioned, and then you start losing the biggest gift that you need to survive in this profession, which is decision-making ability, correct? Or capability.
Yeah. I mean, I think, just staying in tune with the way, the manager communicates with you, I think really is where we get the goodness, right? Like if the conversations are open-ended or the instructions are open-ended, right? And, there's that question of like, oh, so how do you want to go about this, right? Like that's very different from, so here's what we're going to do, right?
Yeah.
And it's a slight shift, but when it is the how, it means I'm engaging to see what you want to do in this space, and you have a voice in the discussion, right? But when this is how we're doing this, you just kind of got your marching orders and you're just going to execute, which I think, we have to be able to pick up on that slight distinction when those communications happen.
Connie, that's key. Can you reiterate that? Because basically, I think that is a great way to understand if you are being micromanaged, is you have to be able to separate the what from the how.
Yeah.
100%, right? I mean, that's a good wake-up call. Would you agree?
Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
absolutely a good wake-up call. I mean, and I think, because when you're getting a sort of the directive, right, you have to see where that piece of control lies, right? It's not with you. You've been given the directive, right? But when you are given the let's talk about it, that means your voice is being invited to the conversation. And that little shift in control is now something we share, right? Because I can now contribute to how we're going to move forward, as opposed to when I've gotten the directive, it also just means that my manager has control over how this is going to sort of play out.
Yeah. And guys, even if you're new to this profession and you're trying to understand how it flows, a good mentor or a good supervisor, a good trainee or trainer is going to want you to make decisions, but they'll be behind your back. They'll be behind you. They'll make sure you don't fail, but they're going to want to encourage you to say, hey, what's your choices? It's like, you may ask a question and their best response will be, well, what do you think you should do? Not, well, you're going to do it this way, this way, this way, because that doesn't empower. That only makes the person more hesitant, especially if you're overwhelming them with answers that they may not even be ready to understand because they haven't developed the experience to understand it. Now, with that said, I do believe that if you're walking in to this profession, and I would like to think that you're hired or you move up in higher positions, because the foundation of that choice is based on the fact that you can make a decision. You're willing to take on responsibility. I mean, for me, those are the people I want in this profession, and those are definitely the people you want to move up in the chain of command, or whatever it is. So with that said, I would like to think that you would know when you're shifting from the what to the how, if you will, where you have someone kind of over you and micromanaging the how. And sad thing is, another side effect that could happen after that, and again, it's up to you to recognize, is when you start making decisions that you probably could do on your own, but then you're going back to management for reassurance. And then
Right. You second guess yourself.
you're now all of a sudden where you never did that before, and these were simpler decisions. All of a sudden you're going back and saying, "Hey, this is what I did today, and what's your thoughts on it?" It's like, why would I ask that? Like
Right.
I've never done that before, and so I mean that's a good sign, right? Looking for reassurance when you never did that before.
Absolutely. But I think that also means that, along the way, your confidence is being eroded, right? Like you typically were very confident, or it could just mean maybe you've learned how to work with this particular micromanager, which is they'll get off my back if I come back and just double check that what I plan on doing is okay.
Yeah, and I like what Connie just said because, guys, even it's okay to follow up and see if something's right if you're doing it to grow and you're doing it to learn. I get it, but that doesn't mean in your effort to grow or learn that you lose confidence in the moment when you made the decision. If that makes any sense. So, like, even if I make a mistake, how I'm addressed by the supervisor will matter in my effort to grow and continue to be confident in my next step to make a decision, which means that I still, first off, have to understand where I originally came from when I made that decision. And then maybe some information I didn't have that will later be used by the supervisor that says, well, you know what, you could have done this if you would have known this, this, and this. Okay, gotcha. So now I've learned. But having said that, even if you're coming back, remember, reassurance is not, reassurance, reaffirming. Those are not really good qualities of high-level decision makers. Again, if I'm looking for a follow-up and, hey, is there anything I can learn from this decision I made, or would you have done things different? That's great. But if I'm kind of looking in like, hey, did I do this right? And if not, what could make me better? And just an effort to be reassured that it's okay, you did well, you can go ahead and make a decision now. It's not going to work because the problem is each time you do that, that's not an effort to grow. That's an effort to, be honest with you, be relying on the supervisor to make sure that every decision you're making is okay with them. And be honest with you, Connie, and you mentioned this kind of at the beginning, we're going to make bad choices. It happens. We're faced with tons of choices a day. We're bound to make a bad one, but having said that, there's always going to be that level of consequence that, I wish we live in a perfect world where every decision had no concerns at the other end of it, But by the end of the day is that when you go ahead and make that decision, you still have to be confident, even in the learning process of when you've done something wrong. Failure is feedback, so are you okay with failing and then continuing to move forward and make decisions after that, right? Would you agree with that, Connie?
Yeah, but that's all part of the process. That's part of the learning, that you did something, you made a mistake, you may have failed at something, you took the learning from that failure, and so you do it better next time. And I feel like, that's sometimes the way the manager responds to that failure is going to make or break that individual, right? Like if that manager responds and it sort of encourages them to continue to try new things, to continue to, or even says, well, here, just read up on this policy. Here's the thing you might have missed when you made that decision or something, right? Like I think there's a way that you can still cultivate growth and confidence, build confidence in that person, even after they've made a mistake. But if you make a mistake and the response to that mistake is very negative, then you would be less inclined to step out and try something on your own again, because you're internalizing that mistake. And you may just even be assuming that this person's never going to trust me to do this again. Look at how they responded.
I guess so. It's a teachable moment. And that kind of gets to that point where, as I said, mistakes are going to happen. But I want people to know something. If you're working in an environment that you feel is conditioning you to be micromanaged, then I would honestly look inwards and do what you can to build confidence in your decision making, and don't yourself seek for reassurance when you're not being micromanaged. I think that would be a big part of it, because again, maybe there are moments where the person isn't over your shoulder, but now I've gotten so used to it that now I'm going back to them. It's like, well, stop yourself from going back. At this point, all they told you was the what just now, and now you find yourself going back to them for the how. So part of it is going to be what you tend to do to make sure that you don't become a victim to that environment, which again, and it's also, I'll also say something else. I remember there was a movie called The Story of Us with Michelle Pfeiffer and Bruce Willis. It's a good movie. It's a Rob Reiner film. They're going through a divorce, whatnot. And one of them, I believe it's her. She solved, her job is she does crossword puzzles or something like that. I remember something with crossword puzzles. And when they get in this argument, she kind of says that, this is what the unique part was. She kind of says that she loves crossword puzzles, guys. And by the way, I'm paraphrasing here, but she says she loves crossword puzzles because they give her little victories. Now, she knows she may never get the big victory. Like, what's the meaning of life? I'm never going to get that. But there is some level of confidence and success in the little victories, the victories that you have control of. And I think that plays out here where at the bigger picture, okay, I'm being micromanaged. I get it. But maybe there's nothing I can do. Maybe this is person management style and I wish they could change. But right now, I feel like I'm trapped. They're not going to change. I spoke it up. They're still doing the same thing. Fine. I get it. Maybe we can find little victories in those moments where we're not. And we could make some level of decisions, however small they may be, in an effort to say, well, that's a victory on my end. So you don't lose out on that ability to take responsibility, take control. And I think a big part of that is you have to ask yourself as well, am I now victim to this? Am I now seeking for reassurance as opposed to them giving me reassurance? I think that's a big thing too, right? Am I asking?
Yeah. Because in those instances, we're also teaching the manager how to manage us, right? So the manager may be observing that you need constant reinforcement, which will also in turn push the manager to reinforce more often, right? And it could feel like micromanagement. You need, you go back to them for confirmation on the direction you're going to go. Then the manager might think, well, let's just skip the step. I'll tell them the direction to go, right? So I think it's also just being mindful that you may be making yourself look like you need this level of management in order to be successful or in order to be comfortable, which I think also feeds into the inability for the manager to actually trust that you can go out and do this work independently and you don't need them to constantly be a part of the equation, right? So I think we just got to be mindful, I think, of how we approach these situations and what we're communicating, whether verbally or non-verbally.
Right. And guys, that does matter because in the end, guys, a lot of the times it really is subjective. It really is how we interpret the environment, and that leads to the assumption. So technically, I think the best way you could do it is break the cycle, is either take the stand if possible, but if at any chance it's exhausted and you just can't make any headway that way, then you have to look within yourself and do what you can every day to not let that micromanagement seek in. Because I'm telling you something, guys, eventually get to the point where you do seek it and you don't know it. And that to me would become the biggest problem, because now I could take you out of the environment and still going to exist. At this point, it's not so much the environment anymore. Now it's become you, And again, we have pushed on the management side of this because, again, they wind up producing employees that are hesitant and afraid to move. And the sad thing is what management doesn't realize, they also start to spread themselves too thin, because there's no way that as you start to move up and your areas become bigger and bigger, that you can micromanage everything. At one point, you just have to be able to trust the system in play and know that it's going to play out. And we're all guilty for it, because I can find myself doing it from time to time. If I see an email in limbo for too long, it's like, okay, I got to get this done, when technically
sometimes it's easier, right? I think that's the other part too. Sometimes it's just easier. If I just go get it done, it's done, right? But I think one of the points that I read about micromanagers are those who somehow feel that their involvement reinforces their superiority, right? And so whether that is you are more fluent with the policies and procedures, or you're better at time management or email management or whatever that is, right? It's the messaging that's sent by stepping in, right? And I think sometimes just in our environment, we don't necessarily have the luxury of time, right? An email that has a certain level of urgency to it can't just sit in a box and we just hope that someone is going to respond to this in a timely manner, right? Like I guess a way to not micromanage that, right, would be to send the person responsible for responding a quick note and say, hey, just wondering if you're going to address this today or not, right? Like that might be the thing.
Hey, guys, as we have this dialogue, guys, it is very important to note that we do have control to some extent of maybe not so much the situation we're in, but how we can deal with that situation. I think that's key. If we allow it to set in, if we allow ourselves to be a victim to our environment, then the problem is that we will be a victim to the environment. So here is, okay, I recognized I'm being micromanaged. I get it. I will go ahead and speak my concerns to see if they listen. Okay, but my influence isn't working. I tried my best. They're not listening. So I feel like I'm still being micromanaged. Ganji, what should I do next? Well, the next step is that you yourself have to do what you can to break away from that feeling of being micromanaged. And I think that's where it becomes key. I think that if you're able to break away from the feeling by first recognizing that you're being micromanaged and then trying to make efforts within these parameters to feel some level of responsibility for decision making, not to find yourself, again, following up for reassurance. That's the best way that you could start to get out of being micromanaged. Connie, what I was saying real quick is that I think after you express the concern about, first, okay, I recognize I'm being micromanaged. Then I go ahead and express the concern to management. That still doesn't work. Then it's really up to me to change how I feel about the situation I'm in to make an effort. You know what I mean? Because the only thing is at that point, when you recognize it's a concern and then you tell management and they don't do nothing, you're going to get trapped. So the problem is that I could fall victim to the situation and become hopeless, or I cannot allow the situation to define me and then find ways to maneuver, like you mentioned before, which, just for my own sanity, my own level of keeping myself where I need to be. But again, the only way that works is if you yourself are willing to first, as I said, recognize it, right? And then catch yourself when you feel that you're falling back into that level of reassurance or confirmation. Would you agree?
Yeah, so I think the catching yourself is really important. I think it matters that, when you catch yourself, you also identify not only your behaviors, but you identify the behaviors of that micromanager. What are those things that either serve as a trigger or those things that the micromanager may think are really important? And so those things, so when you see it, you can kind of prepare to manage around it, right? Like, if you have someone who's like, they're very big on timely responses to an email, for example, right? I think a way to handle the micromanager could be, let me send this micromanager a quick email to say, hey, I'm handling these 3 things, but I will address that email by the end of the day.
Yeah.
Right? Because now the micromanager is not going to be inclined to jump all over you to get you to do it. And they're not going to jump in and do it. They now have the information to know that, one, you identify this is important to them, right? It may be important to you as well, right? But you've got 5 other fires you're putting out right now. But that quick one-liner can change the way that micromanager is going to deal with you when it comes to emails.
Yeah, it doesn't leave anything in limbo. Most of the time, well, what's funny? You mentioned something. I think an effort to chase the what, because things are left in limbo. In order for them to really be good with an answer, they start doing the how, because they know if you follow the how, the job will get done. So sometimes if you want to stop it at the what side, it's like, give them a time frame. I'll get this done. I'll have it for you by the end of the day. And then at least that gives them a window, and they're not trying to find out easier ways to get the job done. But again, that's if you're working with someone who's reasonable and understands that, okay, I get it, like myself. I think I do it sometimes, so I get it. But again, I think it's a great dialogue. We never had it from this perspective going up. But I will say at this point here, if you allow yourself to fall victim to it, technically, then I would say that you allowed yourself to fall victim to it. That's pretty much it. If you allow yourself to fall victim to it, it's because you allowed yourself to fall victim to it. I think there's ways that you could be mindful of what's happening to yourself through what we talked about, recognizing certain things and then trying to balance that out. Even if, as I said, if you're having a dialogue and it's not working, are you truly trapped and hopeless? No, because now you can look back and say, well, how do I deal with this situation? So just in case, if there's ever a door that opens, I see the door, because the last thing you want to do is get so trapped that you no longer see the door. So your reminder is, okay, I know I'm kind of limited now within these parameters, but one day a door will open and I have to make sure I don't become blind to that door. So with that said, that's where the reminder comes in, the small victories, catching yourself when your behaviors start to reflect one of someone being micromanaged. So here's the other thing, guys. You may be forced into actions because you could be working with someone that's being micromanaged. But when you're by yourself and you're not being micromanaged, because there'll be times when that happens, do your behavior still fall into being micromanaged? Like when you're not asked about the how and you wind up going to seek the how. And when Connie mentioned questions before or mistakes before, what I wanted to get at with that is, and we did touch on it, so it's okay, just let you know we didn't forget about it, but we touched on it, is how it's delivered, how the mistake is delivered by management to kind of build growth as opposed to making you less confident. So we kind of touched on that already. So, Connie, anything you'd like to say in closing?
I would like to say that micromanaging can be just really toxic. And, in some cases, I've seen micromanaging turn into harassment, right? And so for the person who's on the receiving end of a boss who is excessive, I think they won't stop until the awareness is raised as to how it's impacting your ability to do your job, right? And sometimes those are just very difficult conversations. And I would just say, be very thoughtful about how you address it. And sometimes that may mean pulling someone else into the room with you, right? So maybe you talked to your lieutenant about it and, the lieutenant has some other insights that may be of value to that conversation. So it doesn't go unaddressed for too long, right? Because it can make for a very uncomfortable workday. It can make it very uncomfortable for you to, so one, we talk about staff retention all the time, right? Some people just want to get away from that. What do they say? They don't usually quit a job, they quit a boss, right? And a micromanaging boss isn't necessarily the best boss to work under. And so I would just say, if you enjoy the job that you're doing, you happen to have a micromanaging boss, there are ways to definitely address that issue. And sometimes if you don't feel comfortable doing it alone, you can bring someone else in who you think may have a different relationship with that manager, and they may respect that manager's perspective, right? And that may help you to sort of ease what you're feeling from that micromanager, but it will definitely open that micromanager's eyes to the impact their management style is having.
And that's the key. Again, just as much as you have to recognize you're being micromanaged, they have to recognize that they're doing it. And again, on my end here, the only thing I would say is the initiative really is on you. At this point, if you're trapped where, as I said, you've mentioned it, you don't know what any else to do, what else you can do next. Then at that point, honestly, is that you have to kind of deal with, well, how can I shift my feelings about the situation I'm in so I could still remain confident in my decision making, even if I'm being micromanaged. Even if that's, instead of finding confidence in the bigger picture, maybe it's confidence in the smaller details of what that job entails. So if they're micromanaging the many steps of the how, maybe there's some confidence you can find in the different steps of the how that may allow some level of your discretion involved. Because usually when they micromanage, they could micromanage every little thing, but sometimes they may micromanage just certain aspects of it. and that could just be frustrating enough. But I will say one thing. It does destroy confidence. That's why it's very important that you attack it before it occurs, because in the end, if you don't attack it right away, your ability to be confident in the next level, it's not going to be there. And God forbid you do get promoted and you don't have that confidence. And then you're no longer working on someone that's micromanager, because now you are that person. You're going to be looking to be micromanaged because you're going to be afraid to make every decision, and you're going to be making phone calls to people like, hey, dude, why aren't you making that decision? Like, why are you coming to us now making that decision? And I think it's a great dialogue, and hopefully, someone gets something from it. As always, guys, this show is Tear Talk. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. Stay safe.